Today for our Wednesday webinar for Total Gardening. We are excited to talk all about everything that you can grow in your garden, the complete garden, from flowers to roses to foods to, everything. So we are really excited to have people here from all over, and I'm excited to introduce everybody today. So first, I wanted to go ahead and just introduce a few of the people that we're going to have talking today. And Diane, do you want to go ahead and take the floor?
Oh, absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Diane Summers, president of the American Rose Society. I've been growing roses for over 35 years, and I have about 225 rose bushes or so in my Wisconsin garden. So roses is definitely my hobby, although since retirement, I am dabbling with other plants in the garden.
I love it. And I see your really pretty pictures of your roses. I'm jealous of those. Those are so pretty.
Oh, thank you. I can help you grow those, Carrie.
I need your help. I need your help. So I feel like this webinar is just as much for me as for everybody else as well, because I need to learn all about roses.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. Next up, I wanted to introduce myself too. I am Carrie. My husband and I are the creators of the From Seed to Spoon app, from Park Seeds app. And we created that to help us grow food out in our garden. So these are a few pictures of our garden. We've been growing. We started in, like 2015, I think it was. Here's our most recent picture of our garden. So we do a lot of food and edible growing, and we do a lot of companion plants as well. But mainly it is going to be the edibles that we are focused on. And yeah, so this is me in my garden. And then next, let's introduce, Laura. Here's a picture of your garden.
Okay, I'm Laura Root. I am the senior merchant for all live plants and hard goods at JPPA, or what is very commonly known as Park Seed. This is my vegetable garden. I garden for many, many purposes. Some are purposes that I get in way over my head, I'm sure as many gardeners are familiar with. But I very much enjoy controlling the food that I eat and lowering grocery bills. I also have ornamental gardens around some landscape and fencing structures. And it is the epitome of the chaos garden currently, just because, buying a house at age 30, there was nothing but a house on grass. So I've been trying to give myself some landscape too.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love it. Okay.
And what fun to start with such an open landscape. I can imagine a lot of rose bushes on
that. Wes, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Wes Harville. I'm the rosarian for the 3 garden brands at Jackson Perkins Park Acquisition. I am a total gardener. As you can see in the pictures here, I have everything from basil to climbing roses to perennials and annuals, even a little mint in there, and shrubs. So this is what we're here to talk about today. And the main point here is there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's just have fun.
Absolutely. That's very true. Because I feel like all of us do something different. And there, again, like you said, there's no right or wrong. Everybody does it their own unique way. Well, that's great. Well, I am so glad that everybody is here today. And I'm really happy that all of you are joining us today in the comments. We are really excited to talk with you today about total gardening and including all of the aspects of gardening into your garden, and hopefully inspire you guys today too. So I would love to see you guys show up in the chat, like introduce yourselves, tell us what zone that you guys are in. And just let us know if you guys have any questions, because we can pull up live questions as well. So feel free to ask us any and all questions that you have, and we will go through any questions that come through. So we're going to get started too. We did have a registration form, and we had lots of really great questions that came through with that. So one of the first questions that we thought that we would talk about just briefly is going to be some tips for the hobbyist gardener who doesn't have any help and has a full-time job. What are some time-saving tips and tricks for someone who might only have a few hours a week?
Well, my friend in the garden for saving time is that tedious job of weeding. So I like to have a good ground cover of plants or mulch to discourage the weeds from growing, because honestly, that's what takes the most time in my garden during the hard growing months.
Yeah, weeding is definitely always something like I feel like you definitely need to stay on top of that as you go.
Mhm.
Yep. Anybody else have some cool tips for time saving?
If you're starting from scratch, start small.
Yes. So one thing I will say too, I absolutely love the fabric raised beds, which are just like they're amazing, and they're just like little containers. And I grow a lot in those, but especially in the summertime when I don't have a lot of time before it gets too hot out there, I take those smart pots and I put them into like this little kiddie pool, just so that way they can like drink and get water all throughout the day. So that way they stay moist and they can almost be watered a lot faster. So that's something that I always tell people to do too. So if they have any sort of like fabric raised beds or anything like that, I always tell them make sure you do like a kiddie pool or something like that, especially in this heat. Because I'm in Oklahoma City in Zone 7, and it can get very, very hot. So it is definitely something that I always do. Okay, so we have some other questions. Let's see. So our yard space, front and back, has a number of large trees. So there's a lot of shade. What are some favorite tried and true bloomers attractive to pollinators that tolerate shade and some filtered shade in the morning and afternoon, as well as hot afternoon sun on summer afternoons?
I can jump in here.
Yeah.
Really good one, I think, is heuchera. Lots of colors come out in the shade. It flowers little bells above the foliage that attracts pollinators, hummingbirds, bees. It does need some moist soil, so you will have to water it a little bit, especially if you're doing an underplanting under trees or something where trees are going to suck the moisture away. But I find that those do fairly well in the heat. Hostas are also a good thing too, but sometimes they can't take those afternoon sun. So heuchera, I'm finding, you should find more and more on the market. You see all the cool different colors. There's a lot of options.
Those hosta, bloom during the summer and different times, and they really attract the hummingbirds also.
Mhm.
Oh, I've actually grown hosta before. We had a shaded patio area that I grew a hosta in a container, and it was gorgeous. Yeah.
There are dozens and dozens of different varieties for every palette, every color of green and white and cream and so on.
I also
Lots of
enjoy
different-
the astilbe plants. I think they tolerate that more filtered light, if you will, but they too come in a lot of different pretty colors, and they're great to add to your garden for that plume of, pinks and yellows and purples in the garden.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm going to say, so for me, I love to do things like mint. And that way I have it like, it is technically edible as well, because we do a lot of like mint drinks and things like that. And I feel like mint grows really well in the shade, and it can also attract in and bring in pollinators. and help repel certain pests too. So things like mice
Mhm.
and things like that. So I feel like it's a win-win there.
Mhm.
Astilbes up north can also take more sun too, so they're a lot more versatile up north than they are down here in the south.
Awesome. Great. Well, again, I want to encourage you guys in that are watching to leave us any questions, comments that you have in the chat, and we can come through and pull those questions up as they come in as well. Let's see. So here's a great question too. So how to integrate roses with other perennials?
Well,
Diane,
there's
this is
several
for you.
There's several ways to look at that. In beginning, there are different types of roses that have different growth potentials that perform different functions in the garden. So to start with, you find roses typically that are larger in the back and roses that are shorter in the front. So select the varieties that you want to build your background, and then just mix your perennials in with that, and then add floribundas or ground covers in the front. And I know Diane has some thoughts on that.
Well, first off, when you think about roses, they do like sunshine, right? So if you're planning an integrated bed, make sure it's one that's going to get at least 6 to 8 hours of sun a day. And as Wes said, I mean, roses come in all different colors and shapes and sizes, so they can really be an incredible add to your garden, depending upon, yes, what size you're looking for. The good thing about roses today is that they really have continual bloom, starting in early summer through the fall season. And not every perennial does have all that summer, bloom coming, constant repeat of bloom. And again, the colors are very different, shapes are different. They're great in pollinator gardens, especially the types of blooms that have maybe 5 to 6, 8 petals with all those wonderful, beautiful stamens showing. So there's a lot of selections, and I would just add that today roses are being hybridized that are very disease resistant as well. So as long as you have, that sunny spot, good drainage, just like all your plants need, I'm sure they'll thrive along with your other perennials.
Great. Yeah, that's awesome. I love including like different colors and all of that because I feel like the different colors always bring in the different types of pollinators as well. So if I have like different colors, maybe hummingbirds will be attracted to it, and then butterflies will come. Yeah. Now, me personally, I only have a couple of roses out there. I want to grow a whole bunch more, so I'm really excited
I can
about
help you
that.
with that, right?
Yes.
And in your garden, you might want to look more towards the floribundas, the grandifloras, some of the shrub roses that are going to have more bloom and faster repeat bloom. You might enjoy that more in your garden as well. But it's really up to you.
Great. Okay. We have a question here from Beverly. She says, what perennial plants grow good in clay soil? Which is a terrific question.
I'm happy to take that one too, because I have red brick clay where I am. So digging a hole is quite the feat. A lot of perennials I'm finding out do well if you amend your soil in any fashion, whether it's dumping a bag of potting mix or just a garden soil enhancer in when you plant. You can pretty much plant anything. I've had really, really good luck with Nepeta, so catmints. I've had really great luck with lilies. I've had really great luck with gladiolas. I've had great luck with, just trying to run through the perimeter of my gardens, Rudbeckia, elephant ears, cannas. The clay almost holds up gladiolas a little bit better than I feel like some sandy soils would. I mean, a lot of people complain about glads falling over when they bloom and stuff like that. So, I've had really good luck with all kinds of stuff. And I'm primarily speaking to full sun because that's what I have right now. And I've had really great luck with hydrangeas, paniculata hydrangeas, a couple of magnolias. So I think it's really just important to make sure that when you're digging your hole, you're twice as wide, equal depth, and you're really trying to enhance that soil as best as possible and mixing in that native soil in with it. And that just helps give your roots real great strength to penetrate into that clay. Also, the more you garden, the less that clay will become a hindrance to your plant as well, because your ecosystem it'll break down and it'll just become more and more nutrients for your plant. So don't get discouraged if you have clay. It may seem tough at first, but keep it up and just, take one little section at a time, and it'll work out.
Yeah, that's terrific advice. And I'm going to add just to that, like what I did with my soil. Whenever we first started gardening we had a certain area that we wanted to expand our garden to, and it was really clay soil. So what we did was grow a lot of cover crops there just to get it prepped. So kind of like what you were saying, like the more you grow in it, the better it will be. So we grew a lot of things like radish, beans, peas, like things like that, just to kind of be able to till it in and like break up the soil a little bit and boost the minerals and all that. Yeah, it made it a whole lot easier for us and helped with the soil.
That's really interesting. I never thought about that approach. I'll have to try that in my garden as well. Because roses have the same, they have the same needs as other plants when it comes to soil. And the problem when you have clay, of course, is that the water really can't get through the soil, and therefore there's no oxygen for the plant. So I love the idea of using other plants to help to break up that clay soil. I think that's great. Another option, we use a lot of raised beds where we have a lot of problems with the clay, right? So a lot of ways to raise your bed up, even if it's just like 6 inches or so that, again, those roots aren't sitting in the clay and they can't get any of the oxygen because of the water that's in the soil.
So there was a question that was very similar to this, but how about roses and clay soil?
Mm-hmm.
Are there any roses that do well in clay soil?
I mean, in general, roses need a good soil that has good drainage. Again, the roots cannot sit in that clay. They're going to drown in the water. The water doesn't drain out of the soil, and therefore the plant's not getting oxygen. So again, I would suggest raising it up, or I'm going to try some of your new plant ideas and maybe plant a different crop in there for a season or so before maybe I consider adding my roses. But basically, roses do need to have good drainage in their soil. I always tell people, if you can't get a shovel in that soil when you're trying to dig a hole, it probably isn't the best place to put any kind of plant, and it certainly isn't a place for a rose.
Yeah, and you can just mound that soil, raise it up, like Diane said, 6 inches or more. You can put roses in raised beds or roses in pots.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so so Debbie loves roses but hates the thorns. She says if she cuts them small, can she drop the current plants back into the garden for composting?
You can cut your plants, rose bushes, for compost, but I would steer away from any kind of disease. You wouldn't want to add that to your compost pile, even though, with the heat of the compost, it should be fine and break down. But I certainly wouldn't add plants that have any kind of disease in them to the compost pile. And, I mean, I guess you do have a few thorns to deal with, but what beautiful blooms, right? How can you resist? There are a few roses, every variety is different as to the number of thorns and the type of thorns that the plant has. So that's kind of interesting when you're going through the garden center. Kind of take a look at those thorns. You'll actually see them very different by plant and maybe find those that have a few less thorns along the way.
That's great. Okay. Max says, is okra a year-round crop in zone 9? So typically, so I'm in zone 7, but I would say zone 9, it's probably, if you are frost free, it can probably be grown all year round. Or what do you think, Laura?
I'm zone 8A and I have raised beds and I do pull mine out every year, but that's just because I get okra trees that are like 10
Yes.
feet tall.
Yeah.
So, in order for me to make room for fall crops or just to give myself a break over the fall, I do usually pull them. I don't know if it's a perennial crop or not. I've never had anything reseed or come back up from any leftover roots. There's always root structure left over in those beds. So I'm not 100% sure on that. But when in doubt, try it. What's going to happen? You
absolutely.
You can't predict Mother Nature. So, growing and gardening is trial and error. Try it. See what happens.
To me, that's kind of the theme of this whole meeting is just try it. I mean, what do you got to lose? You'll find things you love. You'll find things you'll never do again. And you'll find things that surprise you that you never thought would be something that you'd be growing.
And it's going to be different year after year. So don't ever expect the same results.
That's exactly right. That I know we're getting off into the weeds here, but just because you're in a particular zone doesn't mean you're not going to get a freeze below that freeze line, or you're not going to get an unusual amount of shade or lack of sun or excessive rainfall that can all affect everything you do.
Absolutely. Okay, we have another good question from Jen here. When a plant label says part shade, does it matter if it's in the morning or evening? Also, up in the north, parts that don't get much sun in the spring and fall may have more sun in the summer.
I can touch on this a little bit. Wes, you want to go?
I just always say the morning sun is better than the afternoon sun, but I'm a Southerner, so may not reply with
horticulturally speaking, that is correct. You typically, when it says part sun, it will be morning sun, not afternoon sun. The afternoon sun rays can be quite damaging. They're a lot hotter than the morning sun rays. And I grew up in Wisconsin, so I do have a little bit of experience being way up north, but I have predominantly been in the South for most of my growing experiences. And have found that tends to be true. So morning sun is typically what you're looking for. It can be dappled and make sure things stay nice and moist for anything up north that, like, for example, we talked about stilby. Stilby is great for the full sun. Up in zones 4 and up there, you can't do that down in the South.
I know with roses, we like to have the morning sun because it'll dry off any dew on our rose bushes. And that's one way, again, where you're trying to prevent black spot from forming on your rose bush. But, I plant roses wherever I can. So they get morning sun or they get afternoon. And frankly, with roses, the more sun, the better.
Okay. So I feel like Debbie had a really good question here. How do I set up a fertilizing schedule for my garden? Not sure which plants get what and when. Because I do feel like this is a real problem, especially if we have like this total garden concept that we're talking about. So we have a bunch of different types of plants scattered around. What do we think would be the best way to handle a fertilizing schedule?
The way I kind of look at it is I try to build the soil. I try to build a soil that has a quality drainage, a quality organic matter, and that is always being replenished with new organic matter. I try to fertilize my plants when prior to when I feel they're peaking. I use a balanced fertilizer, promote the spring growth. I back off in the summer months and then start to reapply in the early fall, meaning late summer, to promote that fall flush of flowers in the South.
And I would like to add that it is super important to know what plants you have. That will heavily influence what needs to be fertilized when. I know that's not always possible, and we always look for the one and done option. But there are items such as clematis and figs that are heavy feeders that would require fertilizer more often. So just knowing what you're planting to the best of your ability and reaching out to the appropriate people if you don't, and how to find that out is super important to also just ease the headache of fertilizing.
And I would add that you might want to also understand the pH of your soil, because for some plants, their ability to take up nutrients might be dependent upon that pH. So for roses, that pH is about 6.2 to 6.7 is ideal. And if you get into 7s and 8s from a pH perspective, or down in the 4 range, for example, there will be nutrients that will not be able to be absorbed no matter how much fertilizer you're putting on those plants. So you want to be able to preserve that, right? And just make sure that you have an adequate pH for the type of plant that you're growing, or plants in this case.
And that might seem a little daunting to new gardeners out there. And even some who are established gardeners, they may not know how to do that. You can always get soil testing kits. I know we have them as a company. You can also contact your extension agent. Every state, every county has their own extension agents, and you can send it in, you can drop it off. It's very, very low cost. And there's always somebody there that can help you read the results of your soil test. So there's really all kinds of resources in the gardening industry, of where you can find these things out.
Right. I use the extension service, and they are absolutely great. It's one of those practices I use in a lot of my different flower beds in the springtime. I'll put about 1.5 cups or so in a Ziploc bag, and for each of my gardens separately, and then I'll stick them in the mail. Reports are great. You put down what kind of plants you're growing, and they'll tell you, you have a good pH, or you should add, this or that in order to improve the pH based upon the plants that you're planning to grow.
So I'll say for me, I do very minimal fertilizing in my garden, but I do a lot of raised beds. So whenever I make my soil, essentially, like, I'm always adding in fresh compost and having like a really good base to start off with. And then each time whenever I start planting again, I'll do more compost and things like that. Now, there are some plants that I will go through and add like the Espoma fertilizers and things like that too. But for the most part, I'm using a lot of compost and worm castings, things like that, to try and keep my plants healthy that way.
Carrie, I did something similar to that this year. Roses, I've always said, are, heavy feeders. And I've had some folks tell me now that, no, you just have to have the right soil. And so I started this spring as well I brought in some really good compost and added some other organic material and put on my mulch, and the plants have never been better. And then throughout my summer, I've just been adding a little bit of a fertilizer with some nitrogen in it to help the plants. But really, really a lot less fertilizing than I thought I needed to do, and the plants are doing great.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm always for the easiest methods myself, because if it involves me doing a whole bunch of work, I'm probably going to slack at some point and not keep up with it. So I'm always trying to find the easiest and fastest way to do everything. So, and that's what I found has been the easiest for me, at least. Okay. See, we have a few more questions coming in. And like I said, if you guys have any questions out there in the audience, please feel free to leave them in the chat and we will pull them up too. Mac wants to know, what is the best way to care for beets? Can't seem to grow them after 4 inches. Laura, do you want to take this or you want me to? However,
I'm going to let you take this one because I have similar issues in my own garden. So,
so for me, I'm wondering about the soil is where I'm at.
Like soil compaction.
Yeah, so it's probably
that's I know is my problem that I deal with.
Yeah, and that's very common. Especially with clay soil. But it is super common to have issues. Like if you're having issues with them growing down further, it's probably going to be a soil issue. So just breaking up the soil, possibly adding in like something just to loosen up the soil. So I do a mixture of things like coconut coir, vermiculite, compost, and all of that together. Whenever I'm growing things like beets or anything like that in raised beds, just so that way I know the soil is really good and loose and they can grow down really well. Yeah, that's what I would recommend, is just making sure that that soil is loose.
Do you mound your soil at all for stuff like that?
We do have a few of our not raised beds and not in-ground beds, but we do have a few areas in our garden that we have amended our soil, so it's almost like mounded. So we have some like fresh compost and things like that that we've worked into the soil. So yeah, it is raised up where it is, but it is in the ground, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I've tried it both ways, and I think it's just my soil structure that's improving year after year.
Yeah.
But I've had the same issue with beets, and I've tried making mounds, and then the mounds seem to be almost so loose that they just don't hold up. They don't stay together. So then you're back to having compacted soil. So, I mean, I'm trying it again this year. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. Well, you can always try containers too, because like I said, we grow a lot of things in the smart pots, those fabric raised beds, and they make really deep ones too. So you can grow like really deep root crops, like things like carrots and things like that. Because people always are like, oh, I can't grow root crops in containers, but it just depends on the size of the container, and making sure it's deep enough. Okay, let's see. Pull up more questions here. Janice says she lives in zone 9B. Do crepe myrtles and maple trees do well here? My yard is huge and mostly sunny.
Crepe myrtles are a magnificent southern plant. All the way from Southern California across the middle part of the country, there's hundreds of varieties. Crepe myrtles historically, before modern breeding, have had issues with different disease or insects, but there are numerous modern varieties that are powdery mildew free, in all different sizes, from a few feet to 30 feet in height. So there are crepe myrtles. I recommend going and looking around and seeing what other people are growing and find out those varieties and growing them. As far as maple trees, there's a broad range of maple trees that have different sun and temperature requirements. You probably will have difficulty growing ornamental Japanese maples, but you'll have success growing the native red maples.
Great. Let's see, we have another clay soil question. This seems to be very common out there. So, fruit trees in clay soil. Anybody have any suggestions there?
This is, the foundation of my invention that I call horticultural dynamite. And I wish that you could just, bury a stick a foot deep and explode that soil profile and come in and amend it. The goal here is to break up that soil zone. And it's just not at the root ball of the new planting, but the total planting area, maybe even a fruit tree, 4 to 6 feet diameter, go down, 18 inches if you can, and break up that clay and add amendment. You don't have to do it all at once. You can add, decorative mulch that'll break down over time. That's the organic matter we're talking about, that over the years will need to be replenished and it'll break down and can be incorporated into the soil. But the goal here is to improve drainage by breaking up that hard pan of clay and add organic matter that will help break up that soil profile so that nutrients and water will be available to the plant.
And I'll say too, I feel like this is my answer for a lot of things, but I actually grow a lot of fruit trees in smart pots. And I put them in, especially things that I need to bring in over the winter time because they're movable too. But I've grown even things like cherry trees that I leave outside all year round in the large smart pots. So like the 20, 25 gallon smart pots. And that way you are 100% in control of that soil that's inside of there. So that's another really good option. Like while you're maybe working on amending that soil and fixing it up, plant it in a smart pot for the time being. And it's done, they do really well in there. And the smart pots last for a really long time as well. Okay, Debbie says her fruits and vegetables don't get as sweet as they should. Let's see, the celery was very bitter this year and cantaloupes were huge, but not very sweet. Is that a fertilizer problem? So for me, I would think it's probably going to be more like an environmental. So probably something more like watering issues. I know, especially for fruits and things like that. Like if you give it a whole bunch of water at the end, like right before you're going to be harvesting, you can sometimes like wash out a lot of the flavors. So that's why they always recommend like kind of backing off with the watering towards the very end whenever you go about harvesting. Yeah, does anybody else have any suggestions here?
No.
I was also going to say watering or just the soil profile in general. Soil test, soil test, soil test.
Yep. Okay. My backyard is shaded with trees. What ground cover can I grow? So I think this is a great question for all of us because I think we can definitely do a total garden that is really good in this type of area.
I love ground covers. You wouldn't tell that by looking at my property, but it's a work in progress. You just need to find a ground cover that is water wise, essentially does really well with dappled shade and drought conditions, because those shade trees are typically going to suck a lot of the water out of the top profile of your soil. So it's going to get really dry. So if you're thinking about that, you should be fine. I don't recommend grass, in my opinion. You have to maintain grass. You have to mow grass. You have to water grass. And I'm sure there's some genre out there that would allow you to have a drought tolerant profile, but I just personally don't recommend it. There's all kinds of things out there that you can use.
Yeah, I'm never really a big fan of grass just because there's just so many other things that you can grow and so many like even edible things that you can put into your garden and things like that. Like there's just so many different options. I know for me, like we do a lot of things just to help the soil as well. Like, I mean, you can do things like clover or again, mint. I know I said that before, but it does really well in the shade too. And I know that's what this question was kind of geared towards. So those are just a few that maybe I would recommend throwing out. Are there any type of roses or anything like that that might do well in a shaded area or a semi-shaded?
There are some roses that may do okay in a with some shade, but again, they do need at least 6 hours of sun a day. But I'll tell you, I have a woods all around me, so I do stretch the limit on that. And again, but full shade would be very difficult to grow a rose and get the kind of blooms that we're all looking for in a rose, right? But in that case, I would put them in a container and put them wherever they can grow. If your garden isn't there, you can use a container to put your plants where you want them, right? But you will also see on some of the newer entries, newer roses that they will say shade tolerant, okay? And so those might be something you'd like to try.
I think that's a good word too. A lot of horticulture terms are kind of vague sometimes, like tolerant. It doesn't mean that it loves it and it thrives in it. It just means it can take and perform to a acceptable level in some shade.
Okay, so circling back on this, we had a follow-up question on the container growing for like beets and carrots, things like that. So I would just recommend to make sure I would look at the ones that you are planning on growing and just make sure that you have several inches below that as well. And then, I mean, because carrots in general, like there are so many different varieties of carrots, it's hard to say like how big it's going to be. So again, I would just look at the specific variety that you want to grow, see how big it's going to be, and then that way you'll know exactly the depth that you need for it. Okay, so Japanese beetle issues on roses. Yes, I think that this is something all the time that comes up, I feel like.
Yeah,
Japanese
it
beetles are everywhere.
is.
Okay, so how can we go about discouraging the Japanese beetles without harming the pollinators?
Yeah.
The newest research, and I'm not going to be super specific here, is talking about interrupting the life cycle. And there's some new products that are being developed that are called soil inoculants. They're mixed up and added to a garden sprayer or a hand can or a hose end sprayer, and those are spread over the soil or sprayed over the soil, and they develop in the soil and interrupt the life cycle when those beetles are in the larval stage. I have talked to a lot of people that have had great success with this. It doesn't eradicate them all, but it over time, it appears after 2 or 3 seasons, it really knocks down the population.
Right. And I would add that, if you are having a beetle problem, I do believe that picking them off into soapy water is the best approach. You don't want to put all those chemicals in your garden. But also remove the damaged plant material, because that can actually help to attract more beetles in. And I have found this, I can get kind of disgusted in some of my roses too with all this, with Japanese beetles. But if you leave it there, you'll see more beetles coming. And if you clean up the garden constantly when you see that and remove that plant material, it may be very helpful to minimizing the damage. I also try to disrupt that life cycle by using a grub product in my soil. And usually it's about 2 weeks before I see the beetles forming in my garden. In my garden, I actually keep a calendar every year, and they typically come between June 27th and July 3rd. And so about 2 weeks before then, I'll apply this grub product in the soil. The grubs are, at that point, they're starting to feed a lot, and that can help discourage those beetles, right, from growing and getting out of the soil and damaging your plants. Beetle problem is not just a rose problem. They are after a lot of other plants. I just started growing dahlias this year. They're bright and pretty and have them intermixed with my roses. And I have found the beetles like dahlias, darn it, just as much as roses.
Oh, man.
This kind of goes off into the total garden concept here, is that, some things are, and I'm not saying insurmountable, but very difficult to deal with. And whether it's Japanese beetles or anything else that you might be dealing with in your area, having a diverse garden that has a number of different species for a number of different functions is a good way of heading off some of these problems. And then when you do run into a problem with this particular plant, like roses on Japanese beetles, you might have echinacea that's coming up and looking beautiful at that time, and it's less of an issue.
Absolutely. And I'll add too, like companion planting too, especially when we're talking about the total garden. Like I do a lot of flowers and things like that in my garden because, well, obviously they look super pretty, but it also helps to repel certain pests or to distract the pests. So I'm very strategic out there in my garden of having like certain things planted by other things. So like marigolds, for example. I love marigolds. They look so pretty. And I grew a lot of them this year, but they are super great at helping to repel pests for tomatoes. So pretty much every single time I grow tomatoes, I always have marigolds next to them too. So I feel like a lot of this total gardening, like it's beneficial for other things besides just
Mhm.
looking pretty.
So have you found a plant that the beetles don't like? I'd love to hear about it.
You know, I know. We've never really had super amazing well, a lot of issues, first of all, with Japanese beetles. We've been very lucky, I guess.
Mhm.
But no, I mean, I'm not sure about companions for that. But off the top of my head, at least, I'd have to look it up. But I do know like things like putting down milky spore, kind of like
Mhm.
Wes was talking about.
Yep.
And products like that would definitely help.
I've heard that perhaps they don't like garlic, but I really haven't tested that in my own garden. And
Yeah.
and I what I hear from people too is that there's really the cycle is they'll phase in and out. So if you have them really heavy, then maybe in a few years they won't be so bad. And frankly, in my garden, they're not quite as bad as they were 5 years ago.
Yeah, I always feel like when in doubt, garlic is probably always the way to go, just because it's so like strong scented and like pungent almost, like I feel like it repels quite a few
Yeah.
pests.
Yeah.
So it is quite the great companion plant for a lot of different ones. Okay, we'll do a couple more questions and then we're running out of time here. Had a lot of fun today. Okay, so let's see, bought carpet roses of various colors for front border, but need red. Is it better to use one or two colors instead? He has lavender, dahlia. Ooh, I am not the person to know how to pronounce that one.
Calibrachoa.
There you go. Yeah, I'm the food person. So purple, yellow, white, red. So what do we recommend for this one?
I don't know. I think it's a personal preference when you're talking about color in the garden. I like to have a variety of color. I just think it makes it more enjoyable for me, right? So I would go for different colors. But I don't know what you guys think. I think it's a personal preference what kind of colors you want to put in your garden.
Yeah, it's definitely a personal preference. From a design perspective, typically you want larger swaths of the same color. It gives you more drama and impact. So pick those multiple colors that you want, but try to do, 3 to 5 plants of each of that color to make that color stand out more, not just one plant of this color, one plant of that color.
Totally agree. Big mass plantings of the same color, I think makes the greatest impact and makes the greatest transitions to new colors. I think that colors that are, all over the place with one plant here and one plant there kind of distracts from the garden. But you can do a little research into the color wheel, and they talk a little bit about colors that go well together. And it doesn't take long to kind of pick up an idea there on what colors to match in your garden.
But at the end of the day, you're looking at it. I can't see it from my house.
Okay, so powdery mildew is on some dahlia and squash and cucumber leaves. I'm using neem oil and not watering the leaves. So whenever I deal with powdery mildew, I always make my own little spray bottle of a milk spray and I spray the leaves down with that. And that has always helped me in the past. Yeah, that's my biggest advice. That's my go-to that I always handle for that. Anybody else have any other things that they do for powdery mildew?
I've used neem in the past, but I have recently in past years switched to copper fungicide. I do kind of bounce back and forth between the two of them. They're still both organic options. And it's important to do it preventatively before you start seeing it. Once you start seeing it, the spores spread really, really quickly. They're on the top side of the leaf, the underside of the leaf. There's really not much you can do once they start to spread. So almost every single year I lose my cucumbers and my pumpkins, at the end of the year to it, because I just am sick of keeping up with it is really all it is. It'll affect the leaf growth and fruit growth at first if you're, in your early portions of your harvest. Towards the end, you're likely done harvesting anyway, so it's not a big deal if your leaves do die, because it's just the life cycle of that plant. But switching back and forth, I'm glad you mentioned the milk thing, Carrie, because I used that many years ago, and I was living in a townhouse and using it on ornamentals, and it worked great. And I don't know why I haven't done that. I think it's because in the South, I'm just scared to use milk like outside. But you know what? I'm definitely going to try that again. I'm going to break that one back out of the toolbox.
Yeah, you should. I'm always scared to use neem oil myself, just because I feel like whenever I need it, it's always really hot here. And I know you're not supposed to use neem oil whenever the temperatures go above like 90 or so. And I feel like that's so rare where I am. So I'm always like, can I spray it? Is it going to be safe? Am I going to suffocate my plants? So I'm always leery of neem oil myself.
I think that's why I went to the copper fungicide about 2 years ago, was because it's more of a preventative measure. So you can do it like every 5 days, I think it is. Don't quote me. Always read the back of your containers. Make sure you're following all the rules and guidelines per your plants and your safety. But doing it preventatively, I've had a lot more luck. Like I don't lose my plants. Like they're just starting to look a little bad now, and we're almost in September. I don't think I've ever had cucumbers this long. So I'm calling that a win. So yeah, I like the preventative portion of it. And I mean, it's disease. There's only so much you can do. Don't stress out over it. It's going to happen eventually.
I'm curious, do you ladies water the leaves of your plants? And that, so you don't either. So that's something that maybe is helpful.
If it rains, you can't control it. You can't control the spread of it via water if it rains. I grow mine up a cattle panel trellis, so it kind of looks like an arch. And they do get pretty dense. And I go through and I clip really bad ones off here and there if they start to die, just to keep the decaying foliage down that would have those spores on it to spread even more. But I water with Oyas and rain barrels when I can. And then I use an RV filter for city water when it gets really hot.
Okay.
Well, I am not as good as Laura. I do a lot of overhead watering myself. I mean, I try to do a lot of spot watering too, but it is hard to keep up with because we have quite a huge garden and it would take me forever to go through. So whenever it needs, like, we just make sure that we do like we water in the morning time if we're going to do overhead watering and things like that. Just so that way it has a chance to dry off before nighttime, just to decrease the risk for powdery mildew and all of that. But yeah, I'm definitely not as good as Laura is at watering.
It takes me forever to water my garden, and we really do it mostly at night. But you just got to train the people in your life to not touch the leaves.
Awesome.
And Oyas have been a game changer. Look up Oyas. OLLAS. It's an ancient watering term that they used back in like forever, and it's made out of clay pottery and stuff like that, and you can make them yourselves. You can buy them online.
I've heard of those before. I haven't ever used them though, but I've seen them. That's awesome.
Game changer.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, I know. That's pretty cool. Yeah, I'll definitely check that out too. Well, awesome. Well, this has been super fun. I love chatting with you guys and talking all about the total garden experience here and talking all about, I mean, so many different things today. It was super fun, and I wish we could continue going on with questions like all day, but we are running out of time. It is 1 o'clock now. Wow. That went by super fast. Well, I just want to thank you, everybody, so much for joining us. And hopefully we will see you again soon. And you guys can continue to post questions and comments throughout. because this webinar will be saved. So if you guys have additional questions afterwards, please feel free and post them, and we'll try and get in the comment section too and get back to it. Awesome. Well, does anybody have any last minute tips, advice before we let everybody go?
I would say enjoy your garden, no matter what you grow in it, and keep trying new plants. As a gardener, that's what makes it kind of fun and interesting, is trying new things, right?
Start out small. You know, one of my favorite things to do is to grow basil and tomatoes together and make pizza and tomato sauce. And it's just amazing the difference from that and what you buy in the store.
Yes. Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Yeah, I always say grow what you eat. Like if there's like certain things that you are wanting to eat, grow it. Like I don't recommend, like if you don't like beets, like don't grow them, you know.
Mhm.
Grow what you want to eat and what you want to look at and all of that. And then you'll be more likely to take care of it as well too.
I would say grow for yourself. Don't grow for other people's approval.
Yep, very true. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everybody out there, for joining us today. And thank you, everybody here, for joining us. This was really fun. And hopefully we will
Yes.
see you all again soon.
Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Buddy.
Bye-bye.